The navigation officer called it out before Nora had finished crossing the bridge. Single Veil patrol craft, long range, bearing 314, no course change. Owen at the tactical display did not turn around. It hasn't seen us yet. Let it look, she said. She sat. Hold all ships. The patrol ship continued on its route. Standard Veil border configuration, long hull, triple drives, assigned to a corridor that had been uneventful for roughly 6,000 years. It moved with the calm, unhurried confidence of a vessel assigned to a place where nothing was expected to change. 4,400 ships held position in the dark and waited. Nora had trained for this her entire life. Not this exact moment. No one could train for the exact moment, but everything approaching it. 34 years of preparation, 9 years of command, and the 17 generations before her who had spent their lives studying the archive, drilling the formations, keeping the records, and doing the quiet, unremarkable work of not forgetting what had been done to them. Patience was the only inheritance the Covenant had ever reliably produced. They were very good at it. The patrol ship sensor sweep reached the edge of the fleet's outer formation. Standard interval. A second sweep. 11 seconds of silence on all frequencies. She counted everyone. On the 12th second, the patrol ship fired all drives and ran. Pete, 22 years old and trying not to look it, said from the navigation post, "Do we pursue?" "No, they will send the signal. Then they will send someone to talk." She stood. She walked to the portside corridor, where a clock had hung at chest height on a wall that had been built specifically to hold it. Every version of the Pale Blue Doctrine, every flagship in the Covenant line going back 60,000 years, had been constructed with a space for that clock. You could not walk from the crew quarters to the bridge without passing it. The clock read the time on Earth. Not current Earth time. Nobody knew what current Earth time was. It read the last recorded time on Earth before the signal went dark 60,000 years ago. The second hand still moved. Someone wound it by hand every few decades. No version of the fleet had ever seriously proposed stopping it. She stood in front of it for 3 seconds. She turned away. She went to brief the command. The briefing was not complicated. It never had been. Veil hegemony, 11 billion inhabited worlds, standing fleet of approximately 4 million ships. We have 4,400. She did not use the display. She had run this briefing in her head enough times that she did not need it. The math is not in our favor. It has never been in our favor. That changes nothing about why we are here. Owen at the far end of the table uncrossed his arms. The engagement projections are filed. I read them. He closed his mouth. Leon, near the door as always, stood with his arms loose and his eyes moving across the room the way they always did. He was measuring something she had never asked him to name, and whatever it was, she was glad he measured it. Pete said carefully, "What if there is nothing left, of Earth, I mean?" She looked at him. "Then we still go back." He did not ask anything else. She looked around the table. 12 officers, all born on the Covenant, all raised in recycled light in metal corridors, all carrying the same archive images of a planet none of them had stood on. All of them ready. They had spent their entire lives being ready. She dismissed the briefing. The days after the patrol contact were operational. She ran the fleet through engagement readiness. She reviewed the intelligence files on Veil military doctrine, which she had reviewed 100 times before, and reviewed again, because the work of reviewing familiar information was something her hands knew how to do when her mind needed somewhere to go. On the third night she woke at 300 and could not sleep. She walked to the observation deck. Owen was already there, which was typical and annoying in the specific way that only Owen could be annoying, which was by doing something completely reasonable at a time when she wanted to be alone. "The projections," she said before he could speak. just running numbers. Owen. He was quiet for a moment. Then, if the atmospheric compounds degraded at the lower estimated rate. Owen. He stopped. She stood next to him and looked at the stars. They were denser here than they had been at the last staging point. If it is dead, she said, we still go. I know. If there is nothing left but rock, we still go. Nora, I know. She nodded. They stood in silence for a while. She went back to her quarters and did not sleep. The Vale diplomatic ship arrived on the second day after the patrol contact. It was large, much larger than necessary, which was the point. The hegemony built its diplomatic vessels to project authority before a word was spoken, an architectural form of clearing your throat before walking into a room. She sent Owen to the docking bay. Owen was 5 feet 4 inches tall. His line of the Covenant had spent 200 years, some generations back, aboard a ship with a gravity system malfunction that had been repaired incorrectly, running at 2.4 times standard pressure for 4 generations before anyone caught the error. What 200 years of that kind of pressure had done to the bone density of the descendants was something the fleet's medical team described in terms that made structural engineers feel, something they did not usually feel about biology. She watched the docking bay feed from the briefing room. The diplomat emerged from the airlock, tall, multi-limbed, bioluminescent, his skin cycling amber to gold at the rate the archive files associated with high military rank. He stepped into the docking corridor. He saw Owen. The bioluminescence went flat. White, completely, evenly white, no pulse. She noted it in the meeting record. The meeting lasted 3 hours. The diplomat had 4 honorific titles. She recorded him as speaker. He spent the first 40 minutes trying to locate humanity in the hegemony's current species registry. She could see it in the processing gaps, the half-second delays in his speech where the translator on his wrist was running parallel database searches. 6 separate classification categories. No result. Then he accessed the historical mythology archive. He went white again. She knew what he had found. She had read the same mythology herself, 3 days before the fleet departed, and then twice more because the shape of it bothered her in a way that required multiple readings to fully understand. A cautionary story 40,000 years old, a small species on a small planet, refused the natural order of civilizational hierarchy, the Vale's literary phrase for a situation their history described as requiring correction. A fleet was sent, the planet was pacified, the species was dispersed, which was the Vale word for a process the fleet's historians had their own, less careful words for. The story ended there. The species had broken and faded. Scattered things do not hold together. That was the lesson. That was always the lesson. The story had no chapter for what happened after. The Vale had never needed to write that chapter before. In every previous case, dispersal was the conclusion. You scatter something far enough, hard enough, into difficult enough circumstances, and it does not survive. The calculation had always worked. It was not going to work this time. Owen worked through the corrections without raising his voice. He was precise and patient and gave nothing away that had not already been taken. She had chosen him for this specifically, because Owen could deliver difficult news in a tone that sounded like simple accounting. The speaker left 3 hours later with considerably more information about 60,000 years of human history than he had arrived with, and considerably less confidence about the shape of the next few days. The formal offer arrived 14 minutes after his ship cleared the docking corridor. She read it. Large number, resources, territory, formal acknowledgement of historic wrong. The kind of offer that reflected a civilization that had looked at 4,400 ships, checked its recent intelligence from the engagement with the original patrol, and decided to price the situation appropriately. It was significant, By any conventional measure, it was more than significant. She set it down. She thought about a recording she had watched since she was 7 years old. Ocean water, yellow-white light moving on the surface, the sound of it. No event, no narrative. Someone had simply pointed a camera at the ocean and let it run. She had watched it for 4 seconds every night for 27 years because 4 seconds was all she allowed herself. Because if she let it run longer, she might watch it all the way through, and then she would have to find something else to do with the wanting, and she had never found anything that worked as well. The offer was large. The offer was not Earth. She wrote back 7 words. The fleet will continue toward Sol. She did not add anything. There was nothing to add. Owen appeared in the doorway. They will send warships next. Yes. 3, based on the response time pattern. Probably. The crew is ready, she said, has always been ready. She walked to the bridge. She passed the clock. She looked at it. She gave the order to advance. 3 Vale warships appeared on the tactical display the following morning. Real warships, built for combat, moving with the deliberate speed of ships whose captains had received specific orders and understood what specific meant. Nora sat down, looked at the feed. 3 against 4,400. She felt something settle in her chest. Not anger, not triumph. Something quieter and much older, the weight of a thing carried a very long time that was about to be set down. Formation hold, she said into the fleet channel. Let them come to engagement range. She waited. Now, she said. The first engagement lasted 9 minutes. 2 of the 3 Vale warships stopped responding. The third broadcast a distress signal on 6 simultaneous channels, which she recognized from the archive as what happened when the person at the communications console was working from procedure rather than experience, reaching for every tool available at once, because none of them felt right in the moment. She had Pete send them a safe transit corridor back to Vale space. She included a request that the report to their command be accurate. Accurate reports were important. She wanted the Hegemony's War Council to understand what they were looking at, not just 4,400 ships, what 4,400 ships meant. The Vale sent 40 ships the next morning. 40 was reasonable from where they were standing. 3 had failed. 40 represented a scaled, committed response. The calculation had its own internal logic. The fleet that met those 40 ships was not a conventional military force. It was never going to fight like one. 60,000 years of human populations scattered across environments the original diaspora planners had not accounted for had produced something that no single word in any catalog covered adequately. Nora had grown up learning the branches of humanity the way she had learned geography from the archive. From photographs and records and documents that described people she had studied her whole life and never stood in the same room with until the fleet assembled. She was looking at them now, on the tactical display, doing what they did. The heavy worlders came from ships that had spent generations in gravitational conditions, past the range of original survivability projections. Their lines had adapted in the specific direction that sufficient pressure always pushes living things, toward density, toward structure, toward a capacity for sustained force that standard human tissue reaches toward under pressure and eventually surrenders on. The heavy worlders had not surrendered. They had been rebuilt by the pressure over 2,000 years into something that the pressure itself could not move. They moved through hull plating. Not with tools, not with weapons. At sufficient focus and angle, the plating made a calculation that it was going to lose. The engagement reports from 12 of those 40 Vale ships described events that Nora read with complete professional attention and filed in the highest available classification category. Some technical details served no purpose in general circulation. The voidskins came from ships that had lost shielding in the early chaos of the diaspora and had rebuilt over centuries in the specific direction that prolonged exposure to certain conditions pushes human biology. Their vision had shifted past standard ranges. Their skin carried a silver-gray tone that caught light at angles that made people look twice. They moved through darkness with the easy confidence of creatures for whom darkness was simply home. The Veil ships had excellent lighting systems. Until they did not. She did not watch it all in real time. She watched the tactical feed, which was representations and numbers and movement lines, which was how she had learned to watch engagements, because if she watched the raw feeds from individual ships, she started thinking about the people inside them on both sides, and she had learned early that this was not useful information to carry during active operations. She was aware, watching the numbers, that what the fleet was doing was not something the Hegemony's War Council had a framework for. They had a file on dispersal. They had tactics for pacification. They had an entire military doctrine built around the assumption that species who had been scattered came apart, because that was what always happened. They did not have a file on 60,000 years. She did not think about what that felt like. She watched the numbers. When the 40-ship engagement concluded, she filed the report. In the observations section, the fleet performed above all projected metrics. What the Veil scattered did not diminish. She stopped there. She saved it. The Veil sent 200 ships on the 9th day. This was serious. 200 warships in coordinated formation was the kind of force that had resolved territorial disputes across star systems within the span of the fleet's collected intelligence record. It was not a gesture. It was a commitment. The engagement lasted 6 hours. She could not describe all of what happened in those 6 hours, and she was not going to try. She watched the tactical feed, and she watched what the fleet did, and she thought about the archive files, and the photographs, and the careful, patient work of 60,000 years of people who had not broken when they were supposed to break. Near the end of the 6th hour, the Veil War Council's transmission reached her directly. The voice on it had lost its diplomatic smoothness. It asked plainly without formal structure, "What are you?" Not threatening, genuinely asking. The reports describe multiple distinct biological forms, different physical structures, different capabilities, different tactical approaches. What are you? She typed back without long consideration. She had the answer ready. She had been building toward it for 34 years. We are what 60,000 years in the dark made of the people you scattered. Some of us changed more than others. None of us forgot. She sent it. She looked at the sensor map. Sol system, a warm yellow point among 10,000 cooler ones, unremarkable, invisible to anyone who did not know what they were looking for. She knew exactly what she was looking for. Pete, visual contact timeline. He calculated 11 days. She nodded. She had waited 60,000 years. 11 days was nothing. She saw it before the instruments called it. She was at the forward display when Sol appeared without sensor assistance. A star slightly warmer in color than its neighbors, yellow-white instead of the cold blue-white of older suns. The exact color of light on moving water, which she knew from a recording she had watched in 4-second increments for most of her adult life. No one on the bridge said anything. Pete stopped typing. Leon stood completely still in a way that was different from his usual stillness. Owen stood with his arms at his sides. Owen never stood with his arms at his sides. All fleet, she said. Her voice came out even, which she noted. Reduced to approach speed. We are now in the Sol approach corridor. She paused. We are going home. The fleet decelerated. 4,400 ships together. The bridge of the pale blue doctrine was so quiet she could hear her own pulse. The Veil had 3 battle groups in the Sol system. She had known this before the fleet left the last staging point. It was filed under expected complications, along with 100 other things that were real and present, and that she had made peace with because you could not run a 60,000-year mission while spending meaningful time worrying about expected complications. The senior commander of the Sol System Defense Station made a decision she found, afterward, respectable in a clean and uncomplicated way. He saw the fleet approaching from 6 light towers out. He knew what 4,400 ships had done to 200 in direct engagement. He contacted the Pale Blue Doctrine directly and told her, in translated standard fleet language, that he had no orders covering this situation and was requesting instruction. She told him to move his forces to the outer system boundary. He did. Earth appeared on the visual display 18 hours after the defense forces moved. She had told herself many times across many years that she knew what to expect. She had the archive recordings. She had the geographic surveys. She had the scientific projections about atmospheric recovery and geological drift, and all the models the fleet's researchers had built about what 60,000 years of undisturbed time would do to a planet that had been damaged but not destroyed. She was not prepared. The planet on the display was blue. Not the archived, catalogued, 4 seconds at a time blue she had lived with since childhood. This was blue that was happening right now, present tense, active. Cloud systems moved across the surface that the climate models had not predicted. The continental outlines had shifted, not dramatically, but enough that the shapes she had memorized from the archive did not precisely match what she was seeing. The oceans had changed boundaries. New land, new water, 60,000 years of geological conversation between the planet and itself. It was alive. All of it still actively, entirely alive. Pete said very quietly, as if afraid the planet might hear, "It made it." "Yes," she said. She took a shuttle down. She filed it under surface reconnaissance. She did not examine the fact that she was filing it under surface reconnaissance. She took Owen and Pete and 2 others from the Covenant stock. Nobody argued. Nobody asked questions. They all knew. The shuttle entered the atmosphere on the morning side, which she had chosen on purpose. The light came through the porthole at an angle she had no comparison for. Not the fluorescent light of the Covenant's corridors, not the controlled glow of workstation displays. Yellow-white and warm and slightly variable in a way that made it feel present, like it was there on purpose, like it had been waiting. She understood this was not how light worked. She noted it anyway. Then the smell. She had not prepared for the smell. The shuttle's hull was not designed for complete seal at low altitude, and something came through, faint, barely perceptible but completely present. Green, alive, old in a way she had no scale for. She had breathed recycled air her entire life. The Covenant's air systems were excellent. They produced air that was clean, calibrated, consistent. They produced air that smelled like nothing at all. This was not that. She found she had nothing useful to do with her hands. The shuttle hatch opened. The smell hit her fully, stronger now, present and real and completely outside any frame of reference she had. She stepped into the doorway and felt it on her skin. Temperature, not the regulated, scheduled temperature of the Covenant. Actual ambient temperature, slightly cool, slightly variable, the kind that shifts when a cloud moves. She felt it on the back of her hands. She felt it in the air she breathed. She stood in the doorway for 3 seconds. She stepped down. Her boots touched the soil, and the small sound they made, a soft compression, a slight give, was the loudest thing she had heard in months. The shuttle had landed in a valley that the Archive's geographic survey had once labeled temperate forest, northern continent, though the forest that existed now was not the forest from that survey. 60,000 years of growth without human interference had produced something that used the survey's outlines as a rough suggestion, and had otherwise done exactly what it wanted. The trees were taller than projected. The canopy was complete enough that the light came through in moving pieces, scattered by wind moving through the branches overhead, which created the same effect she had seen in the ocean recording, light interrupted and distributed by motion. She recognized it. She had recognized it from a screen for 34 years. She took 7 steps away from the shuttle. She stopped. She looked down. Soil, dark and slightly damp, with small plants pressing up through it. She crouched and pressed her palm flat against it. Cool, real, irregular and alive under her hand. She stayed crouched for a moment longer than she needed to. She stood up. She did not look at anyone. A bird landed on a branch 10 meters away and watched them. Small, dark, with a crest of color along the top of its head that did not appear in the archive's pre-fall ornithology records, because it had not existed before. It looked at her with the focused, fearless attention of a creature that had never encountered a human being, and therefore had no reason to treat them as anything other than interesting. She looked back. It did not leave. She walked past it, and after a moment it flew ahead of them through the trees. They found the ruins 2 hours in, after walking through the new forest across ground that the map in Pete's scanner kept trying to reconcile with survey data 60,000 years out of date. The scanner's lines did not match the landscape, and Pete eventually put it away, and they walked by what was actually in front of them, which worked considerably better. It had been a structure, building material, a polymer composite the archive's records identified as standard construction from the pre-fall period. It had no right to still be standing. 6,000 years would have been impressive. 60,000, with everything that 60,000 winters and summers and storms and the relentless patience of tree roots meant for a wall, it should have been scattered at the molecular level. It had not scattered. One wall remained, about 2 meters of it, leaning slightly, wrapped in 60,000 years of growth that had been working on it with great determination and had not yet finished the job. She pulled the growth aside with her hands. The material underneath was discolored and worn but present. There was writing on it. She translated it in less than 4 seconds. She had studied pre-fall standard script since she was 6 years old. Milk bread, call mom. She stood in a forest that had not existed before humanity left and read a grocery list. Someone's ordinary 60,000-year-old grocery list. Someone who had needed to pick up groceries. Someone who had a mother they meant to call, which meant somewhere at some prior point they had not called, which was the kind of specific human detail that no archive file had ever managed to capture. Not the events of history, but the small, unfinished things. The calls not made, the errands left on a wall. This person had no idea what was coming. Nobody ever does. She stood in front of the wall for a long time. Pete held his scanner at his side and did not take any readings. Owen stood nearby and looked at the trees and said nothing, which was the most useful thing he could have done. She pressed her palm flat against the wall, not the writing. Just the wall, the way she had pressed her palm against the soil earlier. She had no sentence for what she was doing. She was not sure one existed. In the shuttle on the way back up, she watched the planet through the porthole as the blue sky gave way to the atmospheric gradient and then to the dark of space. The planet reduced itself to a shape, cloud patterns visible, the continental edges, the blue of the oceans, different from the pre-fall surveys but blue. It had kept going without them. Every year of 60,000 years it had kept going, growing new forests, shifting its coastlines, building new species in the spaces the old ones had left. It had not waited. It had not known there was anything to wait for. It had simply continued, as living things do when they are left alone long enough with sufficient conditions. She thought about the grocery list. She thought about the person who wrote it. She thought, I came back, for both of us. She did not say this out loud. The shuttle docked. She went back to work. The Vale High Prelate's transmission, arrived at 600 on the third day after the last engagement. 41 minutes long. She listened to all of it. The prelate had a voice that had surrendered its diplomatic smoothness sometime in the previous 72 hours and was now simply exhausted and direct. She appreciated the directness. It was easier to work with than the smoothness. Full surrender, unconditional, every territory the hegemony controlled that had been taken from non-consenting populations, complete access to all historical archives, unredacted, formal public acknowledgement of historic wrong, a permanent seat on the governing council with co-equal standing, reparations on a scale that reflected 11 billion worlds doing a genuine calculation rather than a performative one. She listened to all 41 minutes. She asked for 24 hours to respond. She turned the display off. She sat in her office in the dark for a while. The thing about 60,000 years of purpose is that it fills every available space in you. Every system of thought you develop points in the same direction. Every skill you build, every patience you learn, every plan you make, all of it aimed at one thing. You become the pointing. And then the thing you were pointed at arrives. And the pointing has nowhere to go. She had read accounts from earlier commanders in the archive, people who had stood at earlier versions of this moment and written about the specific disorientation of having the mission finally complete itself. She had always read those accounts with the mild impatience of someone who could not yet understand what they were describing. She understood now. She sat in the dark for a while. Then she got up and went to find Owen. He was in the observation bay. Of course he was. She sat down beside him. He handed her a cup of something the kitchen called coffee when the supplies ran low, which was always, and which she had been drinking all her adult life, and which was not going to change tonight. She told him the terms. He listened completely, which was not always his default mode during briefings, and when she finished he was quiet for a full minute. "It covers almost everything," he said. "Almost. The archives. Yes, and one more thing." She told him the second condition. He thought about it. "Then, that is not a conventional diplomatic demand." "No. The prelate will find it unusual." "Yes, and it will matter more than everything else in the agreement." Owen looked at the stars through the observation port, because it is the only part that does not let them put it away. "Because it stays open," she said. "Resources you account for, territory you draw on a map, acknowledgement you write in a document and file. This does not get filed. This remains present. Every year after this is another year in which it is present." He was quiet for a moment. "You have been thinking about this," he said, "for some time." "For approximately my entire life," she said. She finished the coffee. She went to bed. She slept. She convened the Confederation Council the following morning. The chamber held 16 representatives. She had been in larger rooms. She had never been in a more significant one. Cal Drix represented the heavy worlders. He sat in a chair that had been reinforced before the meeting, which meant someone on the logistics team had thought ahead, and she made a note to find out who. Cal had broad, flat hands that he rested on the table with the specific care of someone who has learned over a lifetime to apply their strength with precision. He made his case in clear sentences and did not repeat himself. He wanted territory, specific systems, specific resources, a permanent physical foundation for populations who had been living on ships for 60,000 years and whose children and their children deserved ground under their feet. He was not wrong. Faye represented the void-skin communities. She sat in the dimmer section of the room, which someone had adjusted the lighting for without being asked, and she wore the filtering lenses her people used in standard illumination. She was small and quiet and had silver-gray skin and eyes that caught light in a way that made people look twice. She wanted space, not isolation, not withdrawal, space, documented, defensible, real space for populations whose existence was regularly treated as an anomaly by societies built on assumptions about what a human being looked like. She wanted formal recognition that the variations in what 60,000 years had made of humanity were not aberrations to be accommodated. They were simply different forms of the same origin. She said this in 9 sentences. She sat back. She was also not wrong. The DeepMind representatives communicated their position through the translation system. It came through as a detailed argument about the nature of historical record, about the difference between what was documented and what was real, about who controlled the archive of events, and what happened to truth when the only surviving version of it was written by the people who caused the harm. She read it 3 times. It was the most important argument raised in the first 4 hours of the council, and also the one she was least equipped to counter, so she did not counter it. She incorporated it. Leon argued for the archives. He was right. They all were, each of them in their own direction. She let the arguments run for 9 hours. She called the vote. She transmitted the response to the prelate the following morning. She accepted the surrender in full. The council seat, the territorial provisions, the reparation structure, the protected zones, the formal acknowledgement, all of it. She accepted it formally and with precision, the way you accept something important. Then she added the conditions. First, the complete historical archives of the Vale hegemony. Every territorial acquisition, every population displacement, every action classified under bureaucratic language chosen to smooth over the shape of what had actually happened. All of it, unredacted, delivered within 30 days, permanently accessible. Second condition, 1 word. She wrote it in Old Vale, the dialect that had not been spoken outside of academic study for 40,000 years. She included transmission specifications, every frequency, every inhabited system in the hegemony, public record, permanent archive. Remembered. Not forgiven, not avenged, not resolved. Remembered. The prelate responded in 4 hours. He had one question. His translator rendered it carefully. What is the distinction? She had been preparing the answer for 34 years. She wrote back, forgiven means the wrong is finished. Avenged means the pain is finished. Remembered means neither. It means the 60,000 years remain present on the record, real, not filed away under bureaucratic language and closed. We do not ask for your guilt. We ask for your honest memory. We ask for the accurate version of your history to remain visible in your history. She paused. She added one line. You scattered us because you believe that things which are scattered do not hold together. We are here in this system, above this planet, because you were wrong. The record should say so. She sent it. The prelate's reply came back in less than 2 hours. 1 word in Old Vale. Accepted. She went back to Earth alone that night. 1 shuttle. The southern approach, night side, where the stars were visible through the porthole all the way down through the upper atmosphere. Something called out from the darkness when she landed. A sound from the forest in a frequency the archive's pre-fall audio files had no match for. A new voice. A sound from a world that had spent 60,000 years developing its own language without anyone there to write it down. She stood still for a moment and listened to it. She found the wall by feel. She kept the hand lamp low because the low light felt right, though she could not have explained why. She found the writing by touch. Milk bread, call Mom. She took out her field knife. 12 years of daily carry, the handle worn smooth in the places where her grip always found it. She found a clear section of the wall below the grocery list. She carved her name. Nora Lane, the year in the fleet calendar. She did it slowly. She did it right. She pressed deep enough that she was certain the letters would last. If the wall lasted 60,000 more years, the letters would be there. When she finished, she put the knife away and stepped back. 2 names on a wall in a dark forest. One she did not know, one she did, 60,000 years between them. She thought about the person who had written the first one. Ordinary, pre-fall, standing in this spot or near enough to it, in a world that was working normally, people going to stores, people having mothers to call, people writing ordinary lists and going home afterward. She thought, you did not know. Nobody ever knows what is coming. You wrote your list and went home and had no idea. She thought, I came back anyway. She did not say any of this out loud. There was no one to say it to, and she had been carrying it long enough that she did not need to put it into sound to believe it. She walked back to the shuttle. On the pale blue doctrine, the corridor was quiet. It was always quiet at this hour. She walked to the clock. She had walked to it every day for 9 years. For 34 years before that she had passed it without stopping, which was a different kind of walking to it that she had never fully examined. She stood in front of it. The second hand moved. It had moved for 60,000 years. Through disasters and wars and the grinding weight of all that time, through every generation of commanders who had passed this wall and looked when they told themselves they were not looking. The time on Earth, the frozen moment, the last recorded instant before the signal died. She reached out. She turned it off. The second hand stopped. No ceremony, no speech. She just turned off a clock, that was all. The corridor was very quiet. She stood in the quiet and thought about nothing, which was the first time in her life she could recall standing still with a still mind, and it feeling like arrival rather than failure, like the thing that comes after, the thing that did not have a name yet. She was still standing there when she heard footsteps. Owen came from the direction of the observation bay, which meant he had been there and had seen the change in the corridor lights and had come to find her. This was also very typical of Owen. He stopped beside her. He looked at the clock. He looked at her. Did that feel like anything? He said. She thought about it. She thought about it the way she thought about coordinates and engagement reports and the 7-word transmissions she had spent her career distilling important things into. With precision, because it deserved precision. She thought about soil under her palm, about the temperature of real air on the back of her hands, about a bird that had looked at her without fear, about a sky that was bigger than any recording could contain, blue in a way that went past all 4 edges of every frame she had ever put around it. She thought about 2 names on a wall in a dark forest. She thought about the second hand, stopped. Ask me again, she said, in 60,000 years. She walked back to the bridge. Behind her, the clock stayed off. The corridor held only the sound of recycled air and the faint, steady hum of a fleet at rest above a planet that had done the one thing their enemy had never counted on. It had waited for them. It had waited the whole time.